Hello and welcome back to WW2 TV, and I am going to try something a little bit different today. I'm going to do a reaction video. These seem to be pretty popular on YouTube, and I'm going to have a go at one about Omaha Beach. Now, caveat at the beginning, I love the fact there are channels out there creating these animated short dives into history. They're fantastic. They're doing a great job of getting people interested in the subject, especially younger people who haven't got much time. They're fantastic, visual, brilliant, awesome. But they get a few things wrong. And this first one we're going to look at perpetuates some tropes about Omaha Beach that I think it shouldn't. And so I'm going to go through it with you and point out the things I think could have been improved. So without further ado, let's start the video.
D-Day, Omaha Beach, June 6, 1944, World War II. On June 6, 1944, the Allies launched the biggest amphibious landing operation the world has ever seen, Operation Neptune. Around 175,000 men.
First thing, 175,000 men. I think he's just got it wrong. The figure we all use is 156,000 for the landing forces on the beaches, and including the airborne element coming in by parachute and glider. I think what's happened here is they've added that airborne element to the figure twice. They've taken 156,000 and added another 17 or 18,000 paratroopers. Now, of course, the total number of men involved in the operation, if you're including the guys in the aircraft, the guys crewing the ships, even the guys back at the bases dispatching ships, organizing the convoys, you're into probably 250,000. But the accepted figure for people involved on the day, landing from beaches or jumping out of aircraft or getting out of gliders, is 156,000 men. So minor detail, but it's got it wrong.
And stormed the beaches of Normandy in France, reopening the second front in Europe against Nazi Germany. 50 miles of landing zone was divided into 5 sectors: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, and Sword. In all 5 sectors, Allied troops, despite the element of surprise, sustained great casualties. However, one of them was more devastating than the others. At Omaha Beach, U.S. soldiers suffered the greatest difficulties in achieving their objective.
Okay, so this is a bit problematic. Firstly, there are problems achieving objectives on all 5 of the beaches. They were all successful, the beaches, but to assume that only one beach had any difficulties achieving their objectives is misleading. And it's the beginning of the use of language. Devastating. This is a thing I am particularly strongly opinionated about, this idea that Omaha is massively worse than the other 4 beaches. It just isn't. It was a successful landing that started badly. And this idea of us using this language that makes it out to be much worse, I have a problem with, but we'll keep on going.
The price they paid on this beach rightfully earned it the nickname Bloody Omaha.
Yeah, so here we go again, Bloody Omaha. I don't think these terms came around till much, much later after the war. If you look at the reporting done at the time in 1944, when these beaches were first talked about, look at the press, look at those reports coming out just after D-Day. They didn't make any particular extra remarks about Omaha Beach. It was just talking about the beachhead the Allies were making. It was talking about the pushing inland, losses on the day. This bloody Omaha disaster, everything being much worse, is a much more modern idea. This comes in possibly post The Longest Day film. It definitely is added to with Saving Private Ryan. It comes in with the Call of Duty video games, Medal of Honor, this kind of thing. And it's now like when we talk about the First World War, and any article in a newspaper online has to say the horror of the trenches. When now a journalist wants to talk about Omaha Beach, they have to put something in like the disaster at the bloody Omaha. I don't think it's a wartime thing. I think it's a much more recent addition to this, our lexicon about how we refer to D-Day. But okay, we will continue with the film.
As an assault force for securing Omaha Beach, the U.S. Army engaged 43,000 men of the 5th Corps, organized into 2 regimental combat teams.
Yep.
The first was the 16th Regimental Combat Team, made from the 16th Infantry Regiment of the 1st Infantry Division. This was the most experienced unit in the entire U.S. Army.
Now that's a weird expression. The most experienced unit in the entire U.S. Army. It is the most experienced American infantry unit landing on June the 6th, yes, but I would really find it difficult to talk about that unit being the best in the US Army at all. We're talking by this point in the war, there are units that have been fighting for the Pacific. Think of John McManus's book, Island Infernos. There have been numerous island hopping campaigns already achieved, Guadalcanal onwards and upwards. You've got the US 9th Division who come ashore a few days later in Normandy. They've been fighting through North Africa, Sicily, what have you. I don't like any use of the word the best. When someone says this is the best aircraft, this is the best general, this is the best, the most, the least, the toughest, these are all words, they come late, lots of baggage. And what it should be saying is the US 1st Division has combat experience, albeit not the replacements, because they've lost a lot of people in these previous campaigns. So a lot of the men getting out of those landing craft on D-Day haven't seen combat before, just like the men of the 29th, just like the men of the other divisions landing on the other beaches. But it's setting up this idea that somehow they are best than everybody else. And I don't like that. And that's the Big Red One was an amazing unit, but I don't think even they would label themselves the best unit in the US Army. Of course, every soldier thinks they're in the best unit, but you know what I mean. So, yeah, got a few problems with that. We will continue, though.
The second was the 116th Regimental Combat Team, formed out of the 116th Infantry Regiment of the National Guard 29th Infantry Division. Each team was allotted a tank battalion for fire support. The 741st Tank Battalion supported the 16th RCT, and the 743rd Tank Battalion offered assistance to the 116th RCT.
Now, this is interesting because later on, it talks about what happened to these tanks, and it's set it up here quite accurately about each RCT having a battalion of tanks. And it's showing that visual there of the Sherman DDs, the canvas screen additions to the Sherman tanks so they could swim through water. The problem is it's not being expansive enough about talking about the fact that beyond these initial Sherman DDs, there are tank bulldozers, there are other tanks with wading exhausts at the back. It's putting all its eggs in one basket because later on it talks about what happened to some of these tanks, but doesn't conclude the story properly. And again, in my opinion, is kind of perpetuating an idea that I have a few problems with. But again, we carry on.
Both groups also included engineering teams whose task was to breach German obstacles.
I'm glad it's mentioning that. Very important.
As an extra support, 2 Ranger battalions, the 2nd and the 5th, were added, with the task of eliminating the German artillery battery at the nearby Pointe du Hoc village.
It's a minor point. Pointe du Hoc isn't a village. Pointe du Hoc is a high point. It's a Viking name, high point. And it's where a German gun battery was. The village nearby, Saint-Pierre, Quickville, they are the villages. But Pointe du Hoc has never been a village. It doesn't really matter, but yeah, it's not a village.
And supporting the western half of the beach. In March 1944, the battle-hardened 352nd Infantry Division...
Whoa, here we go. Here's the big one. Here's probably the reason I decided to select this video. The battle-hardened 352nd Infantry Division of the German Army. No. The 352nd Division, yes, some of their men have seen some action in the Eastern Front. There are also others who've had injuries, wounds, their ailments, who have been recovered from that and have now been posted to this new unit. But there's lots and lots of just new guys who've been trained. I'm also pointing out there are some YouTube videos and books that say the 352nd were hopeless. They're not that either, okay, folks? They are not battle-hardened. They're not a veteran unit that have been there and done it for years and years, but neither are they a bunch of hopeless nobodies, 15-year-old kids who haven't been trained, who don't know how to fire their rifles. What the 352nd are is a typical standard German division that has been in the area for a while, but they aren't battle-hardened. It's giving you, the viewer, an idea that somehow they are really, really good. It doesn't use the word elite, but I've seen the word elite used a lot to describe the 352nd. They're not elite. Yeah, I've got problems with that. We'll continue.
Division replaced the understrength 716th Infantry Division at the Bayeux sector of the Normandy defenses. The unit consisted of Eastern Front veterans and fresh conscripts. It consisted of 3 regiments, the 914th, 915th, and 916th Grenadier Regiments, reinforced with the 726th Infantry Regiment of the 716th Infantry Division. The strength of the German defense was 7,800 soldiers.
Right, now this is very misleading. because this video is about Omaha Beach. That's what it's talking about. It's identified the sectors, Charlie through to Fox. But now, without telling you, it's talking about the sector, 7,800 or 7,800 men. This is misleading you into believing there are more Germans behind Omaha Beach than there actually were. What we have with the 352nd Division is a unit that's spread out over quite a large area, okay, including Isny-sur-Mer, Grand-Comte-Mézy. They're around various chateaus and villages, 10, 15 miles inland from Omaha Beach. Saint-Lô is where some of the headquarter units are. So it's including troops, this figure of 7,800, that are not really within striking distance of Omaha Beach, at least not quickly, okay? They could move up later on, and there are artillery units that can fire at Omaha Beach. The accepted figure these days amongst people who actually know how the history unfolded in Omaha Beach is about 1,000 Germans in those positions behind the beach. Maybe a few less than that, in fact. Maybe a few more, but probably no more than 1,000. In fact, in a minute, we'll watch the video. We'll continue with it.
These men were organized into 13 strongpoints of Widerstandsnester, positioned in such a manner to protect the draws, the gullies that cut through the bluffs, allowing for exit off the beach.
Yeah, that's all true. There are Widerstandsnester. That's how it works. How you come up with the figure of 13, it depends where you define it, because there are a couple inland. You can say 15, you can say 12, when you're adding in which range and fine. But I'm happy with that. But the thing is, a Widerstandsnest typically is for kind of half a company of men. It's a few dozen. The video has just established there's 7,800 men in 13 Widerstandsnest. That's like putting it at something like 500 or 600 men per position. You can't fit them in. You can't. You have a machine gun to Brook there that has 2 men inside it. You can't fit 8 in there. So this is allowing the viewer to believe there are more people there than there really are. So 13 Widerstandsnest with a few dozen men per position is giving us that total I said a minute ago, about 1,000 men, something like that, probably a bit less. We'll continue. And I wanted to say, overall, I love the style, but as you're looking at this video unfold, look how the bunkers are that Saving Private Ryan style of a big open slot facing you, which is not how the machine guns and the artillery pieces were set up. They were enfilading usually, so the bunkers are pointing sideways down the beaches. But, whatever. It's all good stuff in that it's trying to convey history. Just I'm picking out these details.
Each strongpoint was able to provide covering fire to the neighboring ones.
Good.
The assault sectors at Omaha were codenamed by the U.S. Army from west to east as Charlie Dog, consisting of green, white, and red sections, Easy green and red sections, and Fox green section. The plan was for the 116th RCT to land at Dog and Easy green sectors, and for the 16th RCT on Easy red and Fox green.
Well, explain.
As it turned out, as the battle unveiled, the situation on the beach made the plan completely futile.
It's a minor thing. It doesn't make the plan futile. What happened? The plan was good. What happened is the plan had to be evolved, but the plan wasn't futile. The plan didn't unfold correctly. It's a language thing, but I have a bit of an issue with that.
Between 0200 and 0300 hours on the morning of June 6, 1944, the Allied fleet arrived off the coast of Normandy. As they reached the transport area, soldiers embarked transport ships on waves that were up to 6 feet tall. As they were moving,
nice bit of vomit there.
The expectation that the Air Force and the Navy had already prepared the field for their arrival. The truth was completely different, as both bombers and naval artillery missed their targets because of bad weather.
And other things.
A single strongpoint was destroyed when the first assault wave appeared on Omaha Beach. Infantry couldn't even count on amphibious Sherman tanks that were supposed to provide covering fire on the beach. Out of the 29 tanks of the 741st Tank Battalion sent in the first wave, only 2 managed to reach the beach.
No, this is what I was referring to earlier. It's a stark image, even though it's animated, of a tank sinking there. We can imagine there's a crew inside that who are going to die. Remember how it told us there were 2 tank battalions, but now it's only explaining the fate of one of them, the one that had the most dramatic fate, that lost their tank sinking. The fact is, the other battalion, the 743rd, albeit they landed their tanks a bit later, and they'd lost a few, they did get their tanks ashore. And it's definitely, again, not allowing you to understand that there are these later waves of tanks with the wading exhaust that do come in, okay, often in the wrong place, often too late. But there's a subtle thing it's doing here now by implying there's absolutely zero armored support. And yet later, it does show you tanks on the beach, but then hasn't really explained how they got here. So it's perpetuating a bit of an idea. I read it all the time on these things there, that all the tanks were lost at Omaha. No, one of the two battalions lost most of its tanks from the first wave of the amphibious tanks, but not the ones coming in later on. I hope that's clear, folks.
Others sunk to the bottom of the channel as the high waves were too much for their flotation screens. Bad weather conditions also forced the landing craft to disembark troops further from the beach than planned.
Pretty much, yeah.
The soldiers had to jump into water that was over their heads.
Yeah.
Those who didn't drown had to make great efforts to reach the beach, fighting with big waves while wearing heavy equipment. Most of them were too exhausted to advance through the beach obstacles. To make the situation even worse, assault troops were exposed to German fire as soon as the ramps on the LCVP were dropped.
This is a bit contentious. A friend of mine, whose grandfather was the commander of the 916 Grenadiers, said that his troops' orders were to fire at a kind of fixed line about halfway up the sand. So in fact, allow the invader to get out of the landing craft, start moving up the beach, and then pin them down halfway across the beach. Yes, we do know that men were killed inside the landing craft, and that again is the image that is given to us by Saving Private Ryan and video games, things like that, and indeed this video here. But it's not universal. There are other first wave units who actually disembark the landing craft pretty well, and then it's as they move up the first 100 yards of beach, that's when they come under fire, because that's where the German machine guns have been set to fire at. So I'm being a bit picky, but yeah, that's kind of my job.
Exposed to fire from deadly MG-42 machine guns.
Here we go. The deadly MG-42 machine guns. Now, everyone is aware that that is the machine gun that is the one that people consider to be the scariest. Hitler's buzzsaw. Again, I'm not sure that these expressions were around in the war. They're more post-war inventions. It sounded like a zipper. It was deadly. The rate of fire. They talk, by the way, about the theoretical rate of fire, not the actual practical rate of fire, which, of course, all machine gunners, whether you're firing a Bren gun, a 30 caliber Browning, or an MG-42, you fire in short bursts, so that you keep the barrel not from getting overheating. You check the belts. You stop, so on and so forth. So the MG-42 has a higher rate of fire, but there's an idea that it's just people sitting, pulling a trigger, going, not the case at all. But the point I want to make here, the big point is that a lot of the machine guns down overlooking Omaha Beach weren't MG-42s. They were old Polish machine guns. There were some earlier model German ones. There were possibly even some French ones along there. A figure of 85 has often been given for the number of machine guns down Omaha Beach that the Germans had, and it may or may not be quite that high. A percentage of them were MG-42s. Less than half, I would venture, quite possibly less than a third. Now, I'm not saying that being hit by a Polish machine gun bullet fired by a German is any less deadly than being hit by a round from MG-42. I'm just saying it's not looking at and addressing at the complexity of the German weapons behind Omaha Beach. One of the weaknesses generally of the Atlantic War is the Germans are putting their best frontline weaponry to their frontline divisions still engaged on the Eastern Front. So that's where the modern weaponry is going. To cover 4,000 plus miles of coastline, the Germans are using Czech guns, French guns, Polish guns, Russian guns, even British guns in places, old tank turrets, old bits and pieces from this, different caliber this, different caliber that, which means your average Widerstandsdesk might have several types of ammunition. It's ammunition storage areas. So the machine gun rounds for the Polish machine gun are not the same as the ones for MG-42. And this is weakening the Germans' ability to defend in principle because of the complexity of things, the number of different ways these weapons can jam and be stopped, the different types of ammunition, how much training a German soldiers had on the weapons there. You basically, in the military, want to keep it simple. If you as an infantryman are trained on one type of rifle and one type of machine gun, you can remember all the things that can go wrong with them. Of course, in a Widerstandsdesk, you would have a job. Your job is manning a mortar. Your job is manning a Pak 43 or whatever it would be. But the simpler the weapon systems around you, the less likely they are to fail. So this is perpetuating an idea. The MG42 is the prevalent weapon, and there are some, but it's not the only weapon. So yeah, I don't like that bit at all.
76 millimeter field guns, 50 millimeter mortars, and mounted 50 millimeter guns. Many soldiers were killed instantly before they even jumped into the water.
Define many.
This wasn't the end of it for American assault troops, as low tide and strong wind caused the landing craft to land east of their designated zone.
So some of them, most of them, not all of them.
The first wave, only 2 landed where they were supposed to. Others were lost as they found themselves on terrain they were not familiar with. With the command structure broken, and only with a few tanks to support them, the American soldiers were forced to organize ad hoc units and to act on their own.
See, this is really important. When I'm doing a tour of Omaha Beach, this is the thing that I always explain, is the plan was sound. The plan has unraveled a little bit because of things going wrong. Then it was initiative shown by sergeants, non-coms, lieutenants, who then rally these groups of men and start pushing up the beach. That I really like. Just want to say that I'm not being entirely negative about this.
At 0700 hours, the second wave approached the beach. They were expecting to land on clear terrain, but were welcomed in the same manner as the first wave. By 0900 hours, casualties were around 50%. The greatest fighting was around strong point WN62.
Well, this is this greatest, worst, greatest fighting about WN62 around the area. It's bad there, but that's by no means the only place of the beach where things are problematic at this point there. Again, I just don't like this label of this is the worst bit, this is the most heavily defended. There's always nuance. And I realize with the limited time a video like this has to explain, it can't allow for too much nuance. I love, by the way, the recreation of the Bangalore torpedoes. That is really good. The bunkers, I'm sure the animators have, again, looked at Saving Private Ryan and they're picking these big square, big ones with the openings. And every time you see a machine gun, it's that kind of facing forward. But that's not how the bunkers are. They could have got it right. The animators presumably are doing the job after the script has been done. They could have had the right to have bunkers in there. I don't really have a problem with it. But then again, it's just as easy to do these things correctly as it is to get them wrong. And it's, again, perpetuating this idea, the Saving Private Ryan visual. And it's not exactly how the bunkers were laid out.
The first breakthrough was when soldiers of Easy Company of the 16th Infantry managed to find an unprotected gap between the 2 enemy strongpoints. After they reached the bluff, they climbed it and made a lateral attack on the German bunkers. Since soldiers on the beach were lacking heavy firepower, a decision was made to send in destroyers to assist the assault. They approached to it.
It's not quite that simple as a decision was made. The Navy behind the beaches are reassessing and making decisions all the time to change their things. But some of the work of the destroyers was actually improvised. Individual destroyer commanders deciding to just move in closer and offer out fire support. I'm really glad it is acknowledging the key role of the Navy at this point, but it's not quite as simple as the way the narration says.
Approached to a distance of 1,000 yards from the beach, risking to run aground.
True.
And shelling on the German strongpoints. It was because of this assistance and fire from tanks on the ground.
And now suddenly the tanks are back without explaining where they've come from. So you see my point earlier? It's just not quite getting across the full details here.
The German defenses began to fade. By noon, many strongpoints were neutralized and most of them had run out of ammunition. Assault forces managed to make 4 major breaches, 1 on Dog White, 2 on Easy Red, and 1 on Fox Green. By the end of the day, the breaches were widened, allowing for more progress inland. As D-Day was coming to an end, assault forces on Omaha Beach were still in a vulnerable situation, as the beach was still not completely secured. Fortunately, Allied air power managed to cut off German reinforcements, and other sectors had more success, so German forces weren't able to counterattack. The 16th and the 116th Regimental Combat Teams managed to put under their control a piece of territory 10,000 yards wide and 2,000 to 3,000 yards deep. For this small area, they paid a great price. 2,000 to 5,000 had been killed, wounded, or missing in action.
Well, I'm not disputing the figures. It's talking about casualties. It's not talking about fatalities. But again, there's a suggestion here that these losses are way, way worse than the other beaches. And it's not really the case. I've talked about this on my channel a lot. If you take the percentage of the number of the men on Juno Beach killed in the first wave, there are as many fatalities on Juno Beach as there are on Omaha, more wounded on Omaha than Utah. So that brings Juno Beach much closer to Omaha Beach than people often think. Utah Beach, it talks at the beginning of this video about it being the 5th Corps coming ashore on Omaha Beach, which is correct. Utah Beach is the 7th Corps, and as part of the 7th Corps, the 4th Division are landing on the beach. And yes, they had less losses than on Omaha, although actually more than people have been saying. For years, people were saying it's on less than 100. It's actually more than that now. People have done the maths a bit better. But what we need to allow for is the fact that as part of 7th Corps on Utah Beach are the 82nd and the 101st. They are part of that same Corps landing, so they are losing men killed and wounded on D-Day. So if you're comparing Utah and Omaha objectively, it's legitimate to compare 5th Corps and 7th Corps. Well, when you add the paratrooper losses to the losses on Utah Beach, again, the figures don't start getting very different to Omaha. The point I made right at the beginning of this is that there is seems to be this need for historians of this sort of professional but not specific historians to continue this idea that Omaha is somehow way, way worse than the other 4 beaches. And it was in some ways worse than the other 4 beaches. And yes, there were some real struggles in those first minutes getting ashore. But the gap between Omaha being successful and the others was more there. These videos kind of suggest Omaha is right up there as being way, way worse. And folks, it really wasn't. The 5 beaches had a broadly similar result, and the losses were broadly similar.
It was only after 2 days that the initial D-Day tasks
I like the fact they showed the barrage balloons.
Beachhead was secured, and a connection was made with Gold Sector. Of all 5 beaches, Omaha was the only one where Allied troops were put in danger of a complete defeat.
I don't like that. The only one where the Allies are put in the possibility of a complete defeat. If we're using that kind of language, surely at some point all 5 beaches could have been failures. I mean, they weren't really. I mean, we talk about the power behind Operation Overlord. It was kind of always going to work because of the sheer size of it. But there's that moment on every beach where landing craft ramps go down and men run up open beaches against German bunkers and German machine guns and weaponry in those bunkers. And that's the same whether it's Sword or Omaha or Utah. And in fact, there are more bunkers behind Sword than there are behind Omaha or the other 4. It's giving you this idea that this is where the big risk is somehow there's more Germans there. It was going a bit wrong. Another thing it doesn't say in this video is that there was a kind of a decision to abandon Omaha Beach. I don't really think that's true. I think at various points in the morning, naval commanders were beginning, and commanders generally were beginning to think about what they might do if things continue to be bad on Omaha Beach. But I don't think there was any really serious consideration made to abandoning it. You just keep on putting more men in until it works. It's that first wave, despite the losses, had actually got that foothold. And as long as you've got the foothold, the second and third and fourth waves can keep on increasing that foothold. So that's something that I think the language around the fact, we were considering abandoning Omaha Beach, I think has given us reason to kind of think something that wasn't really the case. But well, let's finish the last.
It was because of the improvisation of the men on the beach that turned an initial disaster into an eventual victory.
Well, you know my feelings. I don't think it was an initial disaster. It was a landing that struggled initially, that was absolutely prevented from being a disaster by lots of people working on. And I don't think it was ever really in danger of being a disaster. It just was going to be bad. And here's the thing, folks. I've said it before. Amphibious landings are not going to go perfectly. There were landings in Kiska and Attu in the Aleutians where the enemy had actually left and allies still died. Because when you're invading a beach, things go wrong. People get run over by tanks. People might die of a heart attack. There are friendly fire issues. Bombs don't land in the right place. Artillery shells might go wrong. Things happen. Negligent discharges of weapons. Even if there hadn't been any Germans defending the 5 beaches on D-Day, here's the thing, folks. The Allies would still have lost a few men killed. That's just what's going to happen. When there's a commemorative parachute jump in Normandy for the anniversary, there are ambulances there because if a certain number of hundreds of paratroopers jump out of an aircraft, one or two are going to break an ankle or break a leg or something. This war is hard. Amphibious landings are hard. Putting a force onto an enemy-occupied beach is not going to go without men being killed. So, and the Allies know that. Look at the expectation levels of what people like Eisenhower were thinking might have happened on D-Day generally. We're talking at the end of June the 6th, about 10,000 casualties, killed, wounded, and missing. Let's not get into exact how many it was there. The point is, it's less than they were predicting. People like Lee Mallory, the air marshal, was predicting 70% of all paratroopers might be killed before hitting the ground. He was a bit dour and unoptimistic. Was Lee Mallory? Was Trafford there? The thing is, at the end of June the 6th, Eisenhower, metaphorically, if not literally, is smoking a cigarette near Portsmouth, thinking, job well done, when he wouldn't have had the accurate figures of casualties. He wouldn't have known that for some time. But he knows that beachhead has been established. He knows that 5 beaches have gone really well and that there hasn't been massacres of Allied troops. And the 10,000 killed or wounded from a landing force of 156,000 is perfectly acceptable. Now, if you are the mother of a son who was killed on Omaha Beach or wounded on Gold Beach or killed as a paratrooper behind Utah Beach, of course, it's a tragic event. Of course, if your brother was killed, if your husband was killed, tragic. But in terms of achieving what it had to, which is beginning the second front with 500,000 plus more GIs, Tommies and Canadians in Britain waiting to come ashore in the next few days and weeks and push this advance on, job has been done. We must get away from this idea that Omaha Beach and the other beaches were tragic, that it was. This is what happens with amphibious landings. People get killed. Don't get caught up in this idea that it wasn't expected, that it was somehow unusual. It just isn't the case. We'll finish off, and then I will let you all go and do something else. Well, that was it. So yeah, I mean, I love the fact that these companies are producing this kind of content that gets people interested in history, and it's got the little figures in it that move and the vomit in the landing craft and tanks going past. I'm sure to a certain age group it's really good, but I just think overall it's subliminally giving this idea that Omaha is something of an exception, and it had some things that were worse than the 4 beaches, but as I've said it repeatedly during this reaction video, it's not that bad. It's just a little bit different than the other 4 beaches. So there you are. If you are new to World War II TV, please consider becoming a patron. Please consider subscribing to the channel. Please follow what we're doing on social media and have a look at some of our proper shows where it isn't me talking. Well, obviously I talk a bit, but I bring historians on and we examine all sorts of things. We've done shows in Omaha Beach. We've done them with Alex Kershaw, with John McManus, Peter Caddick Adams on Gold Beach. We've talked about some of these events with historians who know what they're talking about. So this is it. This is Paul Woodadge for World War II TV. Depending on how well this does, I might do another one or 2 or 3. So cheers, everybody. Thanks for watching.